Thanks for joining. We have, I think, an exciting agenda for you all today, so I'm excited to get started. If you could, please share your name and organization in the chat, and if you want to include something fun, you can also include your favorite summer treat. So a little bit about what we have planned to speak to you all today about. So we had our welcome and introductions. We're going to start off speaking about some new high quality criteria for career pathways and work-based learning. Some of you may have seen in our policy committee emails, we sent out some requests for public comment on those particular pieces to share with all of you. So now we're going to tell you all, if you did have a chance to submit that, that's awesome. If you didn't, we wanted to tell you a little bit more about it. So we're going to start with that, and then we are going to hear a little bit more about some work that's being done around the state in regards to creating currency for the college and career pathway endorsement, and then some updates on transportation and the policy and legislative session. And then we'll wrap up. So with that, we'll get us started on our high quality criteria. So to start us off here, I'm actually gonna hand off the baton to my colleague Danya, who's gonna speak about some of the work that we have been doing to create this high quality criteria. So Danya.
First, want to situate this work in like the overall policy context that exists within. Essentially, the work that I'll be sharing with you today is created in response to recent legislation that will lead to substantial expansions in offerings of CCPE all across the state in Illinois high school districts. Some of y'all may be familiar with Public Act 1020917. That sounds like a lot of just random numbers to throw out there, but essentially in response to this legislation passed that says that high schools are expected to offer CCPE in 2 career areas by 2025. And so in response to this, knowledge that these programs will be expanding, that many, that many districts will either be working on implementing these new CCPE career areas, or that now as we expand, many different districts will be improving upon their existing offerings. We were interested in focusing on this improvement piece that many people will be working towards, and focusing on refinement and highlighting best practices of quality work for people that are moving beyond the implementation stage in their offerings of pathways and work-based learning within the CCPE framework. And so the work that we're bringing forward to y'all today was, put together by many different diverse stakeholders across the state, both from geographically diverse locations and diversity in types of positions, types of schools that folks were working in. And we really wanted to bring together a good resource for y'all for high quality criteria, both within pathways and work-based learning, so that folks that are working beyond the implementation stage know what they can be focusing on, and all built within existing state frameworks with the knowledge of the PACE framework and the Illinois Career Pathways Dictionary, essentially taking these existing resources and building upon them to help communities really implement great work in their areas and prioritize continuous improvement and advancement. And so we emphasize perspectives both from current and emerging pathway implementers, and not only focusing on experts, and like I said, really taking into account this geographical diversity, considering rural and small size district dynamics, really bringing forth those perspectives to put together a resource for y'all that takes your unique community into account. And like I mentioned, really like this focus on continuous improvement and ensuring equitable access to folks in all sorts of different kinds of communities. And so as I share a little briefing about this work, I also want to note that we understand that every community has their own needs, every community has their own considerations when engaging in this work. And so these resources are really meant to be taken with your community needs in mind and to be implemented based on what you know is best for your community moving forwards. So Laura, if you could go to the next slide. Awesome. So like I mentioned, diverse stakeholders, we brought people together from October 2023 till April 2024, we brought together CTE specialists, school admin, employers, and other school partners. And essentially what we did from the Ed Systems perspective is we compiled desk research on national and statewide best practices in one place. We had advisory members provide feedback, helping us determine what is important to keep, add, and edit, especially in the context of our Illinois districts. Ed Systems, of course, made revisions and brought it back to the team to engage in a consensus building, to rank and discuss criteria and essentially finalize what we have that we'll be sharing with you all today. And really just emphasizing here again that in these meetings, we were always emphasizing equitable practices by these criteria areas and focusing on continuous improvement. And there's two separate documents that we'll be presenting to you today. I'll be focusing on presenting to you the work-based learning criteria, and our colleague Liam will share pathways criteria. But within both of those documents, this continuum of practice was embedded in all of the criteria. So for work-based learning, how this document is set up, what you're going to get if you're engaging with it, essentially like we mentioned, we're presenting high quality criteria, but the way that it's organized specifically for our work-based learning resource is criteria across the continuum. And so it's separated in this continuum that's likely very familiar to those of you in the room. Criteria on career awareness, career exploration, team-based challenges, and career development experiences, including touching on youth and pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship. And we brought together a comprehensive resource that ties things to state frameworks, brings forth the quality criteria for each of these continuum components, brings forth resources that could be useful for actually implementing those criteria, brings forth community models from communities across the state, and also amplifies some thoughts from our advisory committee as well as some student stakeholders. And so if Laura could go to the next slide, I'll show you what that looks like. Awesome. So I'll show an example of what the career awareness component of this document looks like. And we can be sure to send out this document to all of you in the chat or in a follow-up. But essentially, the quality criteria is separated by buckets under each component. We have high quality criteria for aligning coursework, understanding pathways, student reflection, and engaging stakeholders. And then side by side with these high quality criteria that were put together by our advisory committee after this process of engaging with national and statewide best practices, we also had our student intern, Emily Wan, working with us to create I can statements side by side with the high quality criteria. And so we've presented them this way so that folks that are engaging, we can have several different types of folks engaging with this document. It could be somebody that works at a district level and doesn't engage with students very closely, or it could be somebody that works very closely with students, like a work-based learning coordinator or a teacher. But the idea is for any of those roles, regardless of how close you're working with students, to always be keeping a mind's eye on how students could be engaging or how students should be engaging with the work that you're creating. So essentially for any of the criteria that relate to students, we had Emily check in with other students that she works within the community and to bring her perspective forward to present these I can statements so that we're always keeping an eye on what it is that students should be able to achieve in relation to these high quality criteria. And so I'll give a moment just for y'all to take a look at this page, to read through some of those criteria and give a brief pause before I move on to the next page. Awesome. We can move forwards. And like I mentioned, each continuum component looks somewhat like this. We have tables for each of them in which we have summarized and made as clear as possible our high quality criteria and brought them alongside student I can statements. Each section also has a briefing on policy alignment and how this is tied to how this particular continuum component is tied to the PACE framework, the college and career pathway endorsement system. And then we also bring forth an advisory highlight. So essentially, like I mentioned, a part of this process was our advisory committee bringing forth asynchronous feedback for every single component. And during our meetings, we also gathered insights when we were engaging in consensus building and discussing these high quality criteria. And we summarized those advisory highlights and what the advisory prioritized most and wanted to make sure that the readers of this document were aware of, and put it forth here. And so, like, for example, for career awareness, we noted that there's a big challenge in many districts between identifying what are career awareness versus career exploration activities. The distinction between them is not something that's always made very clear. So this is a conversation that we had a lot with our advisory. So for this continuum component for career awareness, we decided that would be the focus of our advisory highlight. And for all of the other continuum components, there's a summary of what it is that the advisory wanted to prioritize most to be able to bring forth to the readers of this document, and to have all of the information for tying to community perspectives through the advisory highlight and policy alignment all in one place. Again, to not be exhaustive for communities to engage with and be able to easily take these basic guidelines and these high quality criteria and apply them to their own work. And moving forward, the final component of each of these, sections of the continuum, the work-based learning continuum, is a student equity consideration. And so, that's something we're really grateful to have had as a part of these meetings. Is, as I mentioned, our high school intern Emily being a part of them. And so, before we engaged in consensus building and determining and finalizing the high-quality criteria for each continuum component, we had Emily share insights that she gathered from people that she engages with, both through the career and technical student organization. Yes, highlighting what Jenny Kopak said in the chat. Emily is the best, and she brought together perspectives not only from the school that she works in, but she also works with students across the state through the CTSO student board and through the Success Network Student Advisory Council. And so she brought together perspectives that she gathered from those different groups for our advisory to engage with and have on top of mind while we were finalizing criteria. And we brought together her equity considerations and student insights as a piece of each continuum component of this document. So Emily actually co-authored this document and helped us write in her insights and equity considerations for students here. And finally, this is a shortened version of the resources that are available, but for each of the continuum components and each of the high quality criteria buckets that we talked about, we found resources and gathered resources from our advisory committee to share outwards. And so the idea is that for each of the each of the buckets of high quality criteria that you're trying to engage with, that there's a resource that will help you engage with it in this section as well. And so there's a more extensive list of resources on the actual document. We'll make sure that that's all shared out. But this document is being finalized as we speak. We just engaged in a month of public comment after all these many months of engaging with our advisory. And we're finalizing with our advisory this afternoon, actually. So this will be ready very soon. And thank you all for listening, for letting me share about this. And I'll pass along to Liam to share about the Pathways work.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for all that, Danya. Moving on to Pathways work. We decided on 6 components for the quality criteria, and those were primarily aligned with other Illinois processes. The CCPE, Perkins 5, and other CTE programs of study. And the idea of that was to make sure that these criteria were widely applicable and helpful in as many ways possible. Get the next one. And as you'll see it in our next 2 slides, so each component has 3 main columns of continuum practice. The first implementing is made to ensure that pathways meet the bare minimum qualifications to be uh, uh, authorized for CCPE or other pathway endorsements. Refining establishes that there's a process for regular revision, and that might vary depending on what that component part. Sometimes it's annually, sometimes it's quarterly, sometimes it's semester by semester. It really depends. And then advancing, those are the model practices, and really rooted in looking forward and connecting with employer partners and looking into labor market data and really thinking ahead and staying on top of that. The next slide is an example of one of the actual component parts. So development and engagement criteria. This one was really aligned with Perkins. I thought it was a really good example. So over there at the top is kind of a breakdown of how it aligns and what the goals of this particular component are. On the left is an example of one of the component parts. And then for each of, like I said, in the columns for the continuum of practice, implementing, refining, and advancing, there are guidelines for how to achieve those each of those levels. Embedded throughout the quality criteria are equitable practices, as well as practices for continuous improvement. It's not included in this screenshot, but you'll see those later. Then the next one, and same principle here, just a different example. So this one is instructional sequence criteria, and it gives you a different view of what the other components looks like.
So I worked closely with Liam on this career pathways quality criteria piece, and I think the only other thing kind of really left to kind of chime in on is just we really tried to incorporate the feedback from our advisory. We worked with an advisory group similarly to the processes that Danya described with their group of, showing things to them piece by piece, asking them for feedback through different mechanisms, and then reviewing the feedback and kind of synthesizing and incorporating what we heard. And I think there are, several different ways that you can see here that we implemented and kind of added in some of the feedback. So one example actually is those categories that Liam touched on at the beginning. We came to our advisory group in our first meeting and said, hey, this is how we're looking at breaking that up. And it was actually their suggestion that we go and shape it around some of those Perkins quality criteria so that everything is aligned and really together, and we're not, recreating something that already exists in terms of, all these different resources. Rather, how can we draw everything together in a place so that we're just building on the things that are already out there. Another example is how we decided to incorporate equitable practices by embedding it in. So you've noticed with this example and the one that Liam shared earlier too, both of them have that equitable practices row embedded with each kind of subcategory. There is a specific equitable practices row, and each larger table is going to have another row, like he said, that has specific actions or criteria for continuous improvement. So we tried to be really intentional about what we were putting in what column. That was one of the things that we would ask for feedback on with our groups too, is, are there things that you would move into a different column? So you can see, we'll share, like Danya mentioned and Liam mentioned, we'll share the larger criterias with you. We didn't want to get too into the weeds on them just because there's a lot there. And we know that folks would probably really appreciate a chance to kind of dig in on their own. If anyone is going to the Career Connections Conference, we'll be there doing kind of a workshop type session. So little shameless plug there as well. If you want to kind of get in with it, we'll be doing it in that session. One thing I want to highlight too is just some examples. So another piece that was important to us with this quality criteria work was being able to provide examples and resources of these different criteria, different steps, for people to look to if they were trying to implement some of these things and kind of move from one column to the next. So every table does have, and we didn't highlight it in the slides, but every table does have kind of a curated list of resources for that specific category attached to it as well. So that's a combination of statewide resources and also different documentation of some exemplary practices. So kind of along that vein, part of the reason that I put in this particular screenshot with the instructional sequence criteria is because I want to do that right now and highlight an example of something that is embedded in this criteria in this meeting. So you'll see in the equitable practices section of this particular table, it mentions developing post-secondary currency opportunities to incentivize students to complete the CCPE. One of my colleagues at Ed Systems, Megan, has been doing a lot of work with different communities around the state on that particular criteria. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Megan, and I'm going to let her share her screen because I know she has some things she wants to click through. So thank you for your patience on that. But Megan will take it away and kind of highlight some of those examples.
First, I want to publicly thank you, Laura and Emily, for inviting me to this particular meeting to talk about some of the currency options. I'm really grateful for that. And then I want to share the sentiments of my colleague, Danya, and being grateful for seeing some familiar faces here and also getting to know new people as well. Again, my name is Megan Mitchell. I am the Pathway Manager here at Ed Systems Center. And we're going to pivot here a little bit and talk about college and career pathway endorsement currency options. So you're probably wondering, like, what in the world are you all talking about here? Like, what is currency? And so one thing that we are extremely proud of is that we've been able to really think critically about how do we further incentivize those students who have taken their time to earn this college and career pathway endorsement on their high school diploma. And so we've worked with various community colleges throughout our state to think about different options, whether it's funding opportunities or student support opportunities that can be developed uniquely for those students who enter into their academic programs within their particular institutions. And so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. So what you see is a visual representation of the College and Career Pathway Endorsement Framework. And so I just want to take a moment to kind of explain what this is and what this means to us. And so you'll see that there are 4 stackable boxes here. And so you'll see professional learning, career-focused instruction, academic readiness, and also professional learning. So at the top in the 2 blue boxes, you'll see professional learning, and also you'll see individual plan. So these are all things that are taking place at the high schools. And so individual planning are those moments that students will talk about their career and college trajectory. They may think about like how they're going to fund college or talk through those different options, resume building, personal statement. So all those things that typically aid a student to think about what's going to happen beyond high school kind of happens here with individualized planning. It usually happens with like a high school or college counselor in those spaces. And so when we consider professional learning, these are your work-based learning opportunities that happen throughout a student's academic career in high school. So they're going to participate in those team-based challenges, those career exploration opportunities, and then those students will also have an opportunity to work directly with the industry partner, accumulating about 60 hours of either accredited or supervised experiences. And so one thing that's unique about this opportunity here is that it's not just a student going and observing, right? Like they are learning about a different particular options and are gaining employability skills that will be helpful for them as they progress throughout their career. And so when you think about college career-focused instructional courses and also academic readiness, so those career-focused courses are those courses that are going to really push a student towards a particular academic sector or a major. And so part of the pathway endorsement is that a student is required to complete at least 6 credit hours of career focused instruction. And then academic readiness, students who participate in this program are generally college ready, right? Like they are ready for college level work. So they've taken either AP math or English, or they've taken transitional courses as well. So that means that they are bypassing remedial coursework. Any questions here? Perfect. I also want to note too, this is really chill. So if you have a question, feel free to either raise your hand or unmute yourself, and I'm happy to pause and address any questions that you have. And so one thing that we're really excited about is that we at Ed Systems have been able to really work with many school districts across our state to further implement the college and career pathway endorsement. So much so that statewide, about 280 and more school districts have decided to implement endorsements. And so over 1,000 students have received and earned the college and career pathway endorsement thus far. All right, so here is where the fun starts. So when we think about college and career pathway endorsement currency options. So on this slide are some of the topics that institutions really consider offering for students. So we have tuition stipends and scholarships, job placements, additional support services, and also advanced program application points. And so when we think about tuition stipends, there are some institutions that are offering 1 to 3 credit hours for students. In terms of job placement, Parkland has partnered with an employee that are offering placements for apprenticeship students. And then in terms of additional support students or additional student supports, there are some institutions that are setting aside opportunities for students who have completed the endorsement only, right? Like, so these students may have access to additional faculty hours, right? They may have additional support in terms like a special orientation or a cohort model for students, which is pretty cool because they are getting a upward leg on some of the transitional pieces when it comes to transitioning into community college. And then one thing that I think is super cool that I found that students really value is getting those extra points on high priority admissions. And so when we think about some of those very competitive nursing programs, what we found is that those students who have completed the college and career pathway endorsements, some community colleges are saying, hey, because we know how hard you worked in high school, we are going to award you extra points on your application. And so then that is going to increase their chances of enrollment and acceptance into those particular programs. And so as you can see here, I have highlighted some of our colleges that have already gone through our currency program. So you'll see the college, you'll see the pathway that they're offering the currency in, and then you'll see the currency options there listed as well. And then we've also uplifted some of our Success Network leadership communities. So I just want to take a moment and I'm going to show you some of the options that are here available for our students. So I'm going to click on Sauk Valley Community College. And so as you can see here, this is just a little plugger that they will either mail out to students or take as they are visiting various high schools. And so they are offering pathway currency in health sciences. And so, you know, there is some tuition funding available. There's a free class textbook and lab manual. There are particular hours, office hours held by faculty, including tutoring hours for students here. They are helping students get particular positions, and again, application points for those students who complete the course, by particular deadline. So we're going to switch gears and talk about Kaskaskia. And so they've decided to take a pretty much a blanketed approach here. So any student, doesn't matter the pathway, if you've completed that endorsement, you will earn, 1 free credit hour at that particular institution here. Similarly to our colleagues at Black Hawk College, shout out to Richard Bush. I know he's on the call. Nice to see you, friend. Here, they also have decided to offer a similar opportunity for all students. Doesn't matter the pathway. They're also able to support them in terms of some dollars there. And so one thing I do want to note here is that this is just a start, right? Like this is just the beginning of the currency options that these institutions are providing. I know they are dedicated to continuing to think about how can they support more students with the college and career pathway endorsement. And so we are here to support them as they consider to enhance and build upon what they are currently offering here. I want to pause to see if there are any questions about this process or some of the options that you see.
Hey, Megan.
Hey.
Hello from down the hall. Hi, everyone. And Megan, this is awesome. Such an awesome overview. And maybe to put Richard on the spot, but I would actually love to hear, Richard, if you're up for sharing a little bit more about how that came about at your institution, because I just feel like that's such a valuable perspective as well. Obviously, Megan, I know you're deep in the weeds with these leaders. But, I think just understanding a little bit more about how folks kind of come to these decisions and see the value in offering these to CCPE completers.
Thanks, Emily. In all reality, it was a fairly simple decision. In conversations with Megan and our school districts, it really boiled down to how can we use the funds that we received, both for the CCPE as well as STAMP at the time, because we had leftover funds from that, to honor these students who worked so hard. Our school districts didn't need any funds. They said, you hang on to it, do something else with it. And internally, we looked at it and said, you know what, let's do something for the student who shows up at our door with the CCPE, regardless of what pathway they were on, and honor their hard work. So for us, it was a very straightforward, easy decision. We've had a very big focus on the student, and this was a way for us to honor that student. So it's not any more complex than that.
Thank you, Richard. We really appreciate and value your student-centered approach. I mean, that speaks to your leadership there. So thank you for that. Moving forward, we have moved into the space of supporting our four-year institutions and thinking about how they can provide currency as well. And so I just want to uplift that our institution here at Northern Illinois University is helping us in leading the charge. And so they are supporting those students through providing them an interview for either the University Honors or the Research Rookies program. And these are highly regarded programs at NIU. And so allowing students access to these programs are invaluable. So we really applaud NIU for their support in this, and we're looking forward to partnering with other four-year institutions in our state to kind of push the needle here as well. I also want to uplift, some of our high school partners that are thinking about how can they provide currency from their perspective as well. So downstate at Vienna High School, We are very excited and proud of the hard work that they're doing there, particularly in thinking about how do they support new teachers. So those students who earn the college and career pathway endorsements, who have graduated from Vienna and are interested in teaching, and there is a position that is available of which they are eligible for, they will receive an interview, which I think is amazing for students. And a great way for a high school to give back to their community too. Other options that we've seen from our high school partners are providing funding or toolkits for students. We know that those students who are entering into manufacturing or welding, those toolkits can be quite pricey. And so we've seen high schools across our state put the funding for those students who earn the college and career pathway endorsements, which is a good way to kind of, support them as they're transitioning out of high school. And then lastly, we've seen where some high schools are too providing funding for community college courses as students transition into college as well. And so I just wanted to paint the picture here that there are many options and many perspectives and many ways that organizations can think about how to support the hard work that these students have done and thinking about how can we provide currency options. Here are some state-wide currency options here: the Golden Apple Scholarship, the Minority Teacher of Illinois Scholarship, and then Scaling Transformative Advanced Manufacturing Pathways Scholarship are available for our earners as well. And then lastly, one thing that I think is pretty cool here is that ICCB has also seen the value in this work. And so as some grant applications become available at the community college level, they too will be asking the question on applications about currency options for students. And so that further incentivizes community colleges across our state to think about how they can further support these students as well. And lastly, I just want to uplift our next round of community colleges that will be participating in our currency development program. But I also want to highlight, some of our leadership communities here. So College of Lake County and also Rock Valley Community College, they are also a part of the leadership community. So I thank them for their participation here as well.
All right, so who wants to hear about transportation? You have all been hearing me check in at many of these policy committee meetings with some updates from our transportation work group. And I am excited to have some new happenings here to talk to you about today. So you may recall, in January, we released the first of 2 memos. So there's a screenshot of that memo summarizing the barriers that surface from our transportation work group, specifically around transportation that impacts students' access to work-based learning opportunities. The second of the 2 memos from this group is to be released in June. This should be forthcoming very, very soon. So we are excited to share that with you all in the coming days. But today I kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a peek into what this sort of final, more recommendations memo is going to say. So the first piece of that, and I know we shared some of this at our last meeting, is some insight into the student survey responses. So there is a lot there, and obviously we'll be sharing some more of that, but the kind of key takeaways that really are highlighted and discussed in the memo from the student survey are kind of twofold. So the first is just students self-reporting what type of community that they live in, and you'll see that we had a pretty significant amount of the students responded to the survey that were in suburban communities. And so it's kind of two parts to that, which one is recognizing obviously that granted that breakdown, there are probably some student experiences that are not necessarily captured in the survey results that we got, especially for students from those other communities. So there may be a little bit lacking in terms of what we heard. But another piece too is just, how does this relate to how students are getting their information about work-based learning? We shared this survey sort of around a couple different avenues. We shared with a lot of student groups specifically, it's just a Success Network Student Advisory Committee. We shared it with the CTSO Student Board. We shared it with Success Network communities and practitioners to share with their students. IWIN, the Illinois Work-Based Learning Innovation Network. So we shared it pretty broadly with both students and practitioners to get responses. And then another thing that really stood out that is discussed more in the memo is kind of in relation to these other two numbers over here. So of the students that completed the survey, 92% of them said that they have public transportation available. But of those students, only 76%, or well, I guess not only, 76% of them said that they don't use it. So I thought that that was kind of, I don't know, that surprised me. I think I thought that more of the students who had it available might be using it. And so I think that's interesting when we talk about how it relates to students getting around in general, right? We asked them how they get around to and from school, outside of school, how they get to and from work-based learning, if they participate in work-based learning. And, I think it echoes a lot of the things that came up in the memo, which is right now a lot of students are relying on their own private transportation or rides from family and friends. And so that backs up sort of some of the questions we had about the equity implications of students having to provide their own transportation. So it was interesting sort of to see that in the survey, both around that question of public transportation and just some of our other questions that we asked. We incorporated some more open-ended questions that we asked. So when it came to the open-ended questions, there were some common themes in relation to that public transportation piece. There was some of it that was students weren't using it because of both real and perceived safety concerns of the public transportation in their community. Others who said they weren't using it said it was because it just wasn't really convenient. Either they didn't need to go as far as public transportation would take them, or the routes, the schedules, the fares didn't really work with the schedule that they needed. Some students did say cost was an issue for them, both with public transportation and fares, but also just in providing their own vehicle, maintenance on a vehicle, gas. Some students said that, if they had to provide their own vehicle, whether or not they could do so might depend on how far they had to go or where their placement would be. And some of the questions that students don't necessarily know when they're making their decision about whether or not to participate in work-based learning. Similarly, with reliance on private transportation, some students said that they can't always get rides. It's unreliable. It depends, like I said before, on distance, or it depends on when they're going, if someone else in their family needs the car, those types of things. And then another kind of interesting piece back to that, how and where are students getting their information about work-based learning? There were some students who said that they just don't really know, or it wasn't necessarily clear to them what the benefits or availability of work-based learning was for them at their school. So those were kind of themes. I feel like a lot of this echoed what we presented in January in the barriers memo, but I do think there were some surprises. For me, the biggest one being that public transportation piece. But these are just some high level pieces of information about the survey. Obviously, there's a ton there that we asked and a lot more that we could go into, but just want to get to what we're highlighting in this new memo. So
But just before we get there, I'm curious if there are any surprises or reflections for folks on these survey results. To your point, Laura, I mean, I think we had some surprises in here from our end, but I'm curious if the group is sort of surprised by any of this, or if this all kind of jives with your thinking and what you see in the field in your communities as well.
I would agree with it. When you look at some of our harder hit populations, you're going to find that transportation is a significant issue for them. Always has been.
And I think it's a tricky issue too, because I feel like this is one where we really just want to be like, here's the answer. It's fixed. We can solve it. And it's so complicated, right? Because it depends so much on that particular community. Look at all of these different themes that we're seeing, right? These are anything from cost to safety. And that's going to vary both within a community and from student to student in terms of what particularly might be holding them back. And so, as we move forward into some of these pieces about recommendations, potential strategies for addressing or solutions, we definitely acknowledge in the memo and in some of the pieces that we're talking about that these are none of this is going to be kind of an easy solution. It's a pretty complex problem, but we wanted to kind of give some insight into strategies, more long-term solutions that could hopefully prompt discussion and some innovation. So unless anyone has other insights, I'll move on to give some information about what is going to be in this upcoming memo. All right, so we approached this upcoming memo in kind of a similar context as the initial one, which is we spoke about barriers in the past and solutions now in regards to local or district level things. So things that communities and districts can be doing on their own to kind of help address this. And then some more broader statewide system level solutions or strategies. And then we also incorporated some resources to provide more information, more insight on some of the things that are mentioned in the memo. So at the local and district level, of the different strategies and solutions that came up, there was a pretty strong theme about how important partnerships are and prioritizing strong partnerships, both with employers, with local transit authorities or chambers of commerce. With transit authorities, right, there are opportunities to innovate around either student fare cards, subsidized student fare. Those things from the folks we spoke with take a lot of work and time to kind of set up that partnership and establish that, which is why great solution, definitely more of a long-term, definitely really important in that situation for that partnership to be and remain strong. Other things that came up are communities leveraging strategic locations. This can look a lot of different ways, but again, really feeds back to that partnership, in this case, most of the time with employers, right? So it could be prioritizing strategic partnerships with employers so that you can find a larger employer who is working to take more students, so that rather than transporting individual students to many different sites, you can transport several students to one site that has a variety of opportunities and different pathways. And then it could also look like finding locations that are in close proximity to the school that might be walkable. It could be finding opportunities that are along already existing bus routes. So there are several different ways that it could go, but it really hinges those strategic locations on what employers are willing to partner with the school district, right? And managing those relationships on both sides. The other thing here is innovation with new formats. So this is something I know a lot of districts have been doing. This could mean virtual or hybrid work-based learning. I know there have been some work done around the state, and I think some resources in the places we'll talk about later regarding virtual or hybrid. This could mean school-based enterprises. There's really a lot of different ways that folks could go here. A lot of them help address concerns. They definitely are, we would advise districts to offer a variety of work-based learning, but there are definitely a lot of different opportunities that can be leveraged to, in some regards, address some of those transportation barriers. Any questions? Okay, at the statewide and systems level, there are a couple things recommended in this memo that state agencies should consider. So one is just more flexible funding opportunities. A lot of the conversations that were had in the work group and with some individuals that we spoke to really kind of mentioned that if they could use funding, or if there's funding that they could clear up through different things, whether that's, some districts are paying the student wages, and if they could clear up some of that money, they might be able to spend more money on transportation. So it's a combination of flexible funding as well as, when possible, state agencies incorporating transportation as a possible fund that money could be used for, allowable expense. So that is one piece of that system statewide level. Other is just incentivizing employer partners. Like I said, the strategic aspects at the local and district level, a lot of times are a little bit dependent on what employers are at the table, right? They can't send a bunch of students to one site if they don't have an employer that's willing to take several students in different pathways. So incentivizing employers to participate, and also kind of along the lines of that, streamline processes for partnerships. So that could be, there's some work happening at the state level to share more employers that are willing to participate in work-based learning, kind of sharing that information in like a database. It could also be, developing models for what does that district employer partnership look like. Some conversations that we had about things similar to like the model partnership agreement for dual credit. Not quite the same, right? Because that's in legislation, it's a little bit different, but some idea of what does a model work-based learning employer partnership look like? So some things like that to really get employers on board and at the table. Resources incorporated as well. So I mentioned earlier the Illinois Work-Based Learning Innovation Network. Heather and Danya, who you heard from earlier, actually run that group and brings together a lot of different practitioners in various communities to kind of share, innovative things that are happening in regards to work-based learning. And they have a ton of resources that are available. They have a resource hub that has, things like different convenings. I know in the memo specifically, for example, we mention a particular IWIN convening that highlights Collinsville and the work that they've been doing in their community around school-based enterprises. So different pieces of resources like that about some of these different strategies. And then the Career Development Experience Toolkit is another resource that's available that we shared in the memo. So like I said, we want to highlight some examples, but also share resources to get folks kind of thinking about, like, we know these are some bigger picture ideas. We know these are some more long-term solutions, but what can we provide to kind of help folks in these endeavors? That was a lot of hearing from me. Are there any questions from folks? I see Danya shared the IWIN Resource Hub in the chat. If anyone is interested in taking a look at that. If no one has any questions, then it's actually time for me to hand this off to Emily so she can tell us about some policy and legislative updates.
Thanks, Laura. We can go ahead and advance the next slide. So I've just included some updates now that legislative session is over, and kudos to the many people who are on the line who are in the trenches during session. And by the trenches, I mean in Springfield, in the hallways, talking to folks, working on a variety of things. So just wanted to flag a few things that shook out with the budget. I know we included notes about the proposed budget from the governor. So the numbers are, in some cases the same, in some cases a little different. But, there's been an additional $350 million invested into the evidence-based funding formula, which is the minimum amount under the legislation originally undergirding that. There includes a $10 million increase for career and technical education, which brings up the total for CTE to 58 million. I know we flagged this last time, but ISB's got a new CTE funding formula for FY25 that is going to be ideally geared towards scaling up sort of impact and reach to different students, not just based on the number of offerings, but really on uptake of offerings. And so that is going to be sort of gradually changing over time. MAP got a $10 million increase, which is very exciting. And then for dual credit funding, the legislature decided to sustain the funding to ICCB on dual credit. And so ICCB had put out some grant funding this past year, or was working on putting out grant funding and staffing up at the agency. And so we're excited to see this this funding continue on. And as we see dual credit scaling up in the state, the infrastructure around it is obviously really essential. And so this kind of sustained funding is really important. And I think it sends a strong message that that this is a high priority in the state. We can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So I've got just a handful of bills on this slide, a few that have passed on both sides of the legislature, as well as a couple, just flagged a couple that we spoken a little bit more in depth about previously that failed on the Senate side. And I will definitely invite commentary from folks in just a moment here, but just to run, pardon me, run through a few of these. So HB 5250 updates the accelerated automatic acceleration policy requirements for secondary district or for districts, K-12 districts. We're still parsing through the downstream impacts this is going to have. This bill initially started as a bit of a cleanup for the way that automatic acceleration would play with students who have skipped ahead in certain subject matter areas, and it was intended to sort of rectify that. But the way the bill ended up playing out seems to also soften some of the language around automatic acceleration, and so we're still sort of parsing through some of those details as this bill was finalized to get a real understanding of what the impact will be on, in particular, for this group, for secondary districts, when we're talking about automatic acceleration into dual credit or other early college credit opportunities and things of that nature. HB 4417 establishes a workplace readiness week in K-12 schools. This is actually really focused on workers' rights. I think in our view, it would be great if this could get tied in with work around PACE, that the post-secondary and career expectations framework, work around the college and career pathway endorsements, work-based learning, et cetera. So hopefully, as districts are working to meet this new requirement, there can be some real connectivity across college and career readiness work more broadly in those districts. SB 2862 asks IBHE to publish a list of in-demand jobs. This is something that IDES, the Department of Employment Security, and the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity do extensively. And so some of the revisions to this bill over the course of the session were to incorporate the fact that those agencies could be leaned on by the Board of Higher Ed to help meet the requirement of this bill. SB 3581 establishes some reporting requirements to the Board of Higher Ed and the Community College Board around post-secondary enrollment. It also includes details around modalities, so in-person, virtual, et cetera. Then we've got SB 3594, which has some updated provisions around the Illinois Articulation Initiative, offering some clarity on compliance for institutions that may not have a major that certain majors that are within the IAI, but there's some clarifications in there. And then SB 2907 requires reporting on all of our job training programs in the state. And a year after it becomes enacted, I believe is the timeline for it. But that really ties to work around the Illinois longitudinal data system, as well as work more broadly to provide transparency in our education and career systems and those outcomes. The two bills that we've got here that unfortunately failed on the Senate side, and I know we've got colleagues from Advance Illinois on the line, so Kelsey would welcome your thoughts here. HB 4262, which would have provided stipends to student teachers, passed on the House side, but ultimately did not pass on the Senate side. Kelsey, I'm not sure if you want to offer any reflections on that more generally. I know we'll have a second to reflect more broadly on the session, but just in this bill in particular, if there was anything that is coming out of that for you that you'd like to share that Advance is keeping an eye on moving forward.
Yeah, definitely interested. There's a lot of engagement on the bill, a lot of excitement, a lot of pushback, but a lot of engagement. So on both the student teaching stipend as well as a stipend for cooperating teachers. So that was also included in there. I think most of the concerns that, one of the reasons it failed in the Senate, Emily might speak to this, is just like concerns around creating programs without the necessary funding. So I think ultimately that was kind of what killed it in the Senate, but we're hopeful that the engagement around it will continue in future sessions.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. Appreciate the additional context there. The other bill that we know we presented on, we had Amy Galvin from STAN present on last time we were all together, is HB 5020, which was an amendment to the Dual Credit Quality Act and was intended to grapple with the policy changes from the Higher Learning Commission around faculty credentialing, as well as just some work around tightening up certain things to promote more equitable scaling of dual credit. This ultimately passed unanimously in the House. Actually, there was one no vote, but we were told that it was going to be changed to a yes vote. But it passed very resoundingly on the House side after extensive negotiations, but ultimately failed on the Senate side for, I'm sure, a number of reasons. Amy, I know you're on the line here. I just would welcome and again, we'll talk more. We can talk high level in a second here about sort of broad reflections on this session, but would welcome your reflections here. Anything you'd like to share with the group about sort of how you're thinking about next steps. I know Stan was really obviously championing this bill.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Unfortunately, I am driving. So, yeah, I mean, this was a real disappointment. 2 community colleges came out at the 11th hour and changed their position. They were pretty upfront about their wanting to marginalize secondaries participation in dual credit, and that was really problematic for the bill. And Senator Castro elected not to move it forward. So we are regrouping. We're still working with our partners. Shout out to all the groups who have supported the bill. LUDA, LEND, SCOPE, Illinois Associated School Boards, ILLICEP. Lots of people have been kind of engaged on this bill and helping us and working through this and addressing barriers to dual credit. So the work is not done. We are continuing the conversation this summer. So keep an eye up. I'm sure we'll have some updates coming through this group. This bill it's a really good bill for dual credit. So like I said, we are not done with this one yet. And we will keep you guys posted as we plan a path forward.
Thanks so much, Amy. Appreciate you speaking up on that. All right, we can go to the next slide, which is just sort of a general catch-all reflection slide. I think to Amy and Kelsey's point, a lot of, from what I was hearing from colleagues who are deep in the weeds in Springfield during session, there were a lot of conversations that really got sparked during this session, and that kind of prompt a few reflections from me, and I'd welcome other reflections if folks have them. But one of the reflections is there's a lot of work, even though there's a lot of work that's already happened around awareness building and around information sharing and all of these things for certain issues like dual credit or student teachers or college and career pathways, even, that there's still a lot of room to grow in terms of ensuring that the messages that folks are getting are right for the audience and that they understand their role to play in ensuring our students are college and career ready, and where there is need or opportunity to enhance our policy through legislation to really drive student success and drive equitable access to opportunities and drive equitable outcomes and monitor those. I think that's the kind of key piece for me, is that there seems to be still some information gaps, no matter how much effort. There's always some information gaps for some key audiences. And so that relationship building is really going to be essential in order to help build that collaborative at the statewide level in order to advance this type of work. And I think key to that is spaces like this one where we have the opportunity to hear from you all and find ways to elevate your voices and inform different people who are on these calls, to elevate those to help inform that policy. And so those are the kind of key takeaways that I have from this session.
So some information about some upcoming relevant events. So I mentioned earlier the Career Connections Conference that is on June 18th, and actually both events at the Tinley Park Convention Center. I did check yesterday. The registration for Career Connections is still open until June 11th. So if you're not registered, but you are interested in going, you can definitely attend. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to put in a couple shameless plugs. So you're welcome. As I mentioned earlier, we will be doing more of a action planning workshop around the quality criteria where folks will get to reflect and come up with some next steps. So if you're interested in kind of getting more in the weeds on the quality criteria, we will be doing that at the Career Connections Conference, June 18th. And then a month later, you can join us all at the College Changes Everything Conference. Both conferences, I think, a pretty wide array of sessions, some really interesting stuff. My plug for the College Changes Everything Conference. Ed Systems, our youth apprentice who graduated from CPS High School a couple weeks ago, is doing a session, mostly by her, I think a little bit of help with some of our team members, but really led by her, which I think is really cool and exciting. So if you want to see a student run a session at the College Changes Everything Conference, I would highly encourage you to attend. And then a save the date just for the Success Network Conference next year, a ways away, but we are changing the location. So I wanted to make sure to note it. It's going to be in Champaign. So we hope that you can join us for that. Is there anything else coming up that folks are, wanting to share with us? Please feel free to speak up or put it in the chat. If you really like what you heard today and you want to pass along the recording to someone else, that will be on the Success Network website. All right, that is all I have for you today. Thanks for joining us.